Finally, market commonality, defined as a degree of overlap between two rivals' markets, also has a significant bearing on the intensity of rivalry. A high degree of market commonality may restrain firms from aggressively going after each other. Multi-market competition occurs when firms engage the same rivals in multiple markets. Multi-market firms may respect their rivals' spheres of influence in certain markets, and their rivals may reciprocate, leading to tacit collusion, an outcome known as mutual forbearance. Institutions, resources, and competitive dynamics. Mutual forbearance, due to a high degree of market commonality, primarily stems from two factors: deterrence and familiarity. Deterrence is important because a high degree of market commonality suggests that if a firm attacks in one market, its rival may engage in cross market retaliation, leading to a costly all out war that nobody can afford. Familiarity is the extent to which tacit collusion is enhanced by a firm's awareness of the actions, intentions, and capabilities of rivals. Repeated interactions lead to such familiarity, resulting in more mutual respect. In the words of GE CEO Jeff Immelt, GE has tremendous respect for traditional rivals like Siemens, Philips, and Rolls-Royce, but it knows how to compete with them. They will never destroy GE. By introducing products that create a new price performance paradigm, however, the emerging giants such as Mindry, Zuslin, Goldwyn, and Haier very well could. Overall, the effectiveness of a firm's actions depends significantly on the domestic and international institutions governing competitive dynamics, as well as firm-specific resources and capabilities. The next two sections expand on these points, which are illustrated in Figure 11.2. Chapter 11, Section 2. Institutions governing domestic and international competition. In a nutshell, the institution-based view advises managers to be well versed in the rules governing domestic and international competition. A lack of understanding of these institutions may land otherwise successful firms, such as Microsoft, in deep trouble. Formal institutions governing domestic competition, a focus on antitrust. Formal institutions governing domestic competition are broadly guided by policy, competition policy, which determines the institutional mix of competition and cooperation that gives rise to the market system. Of particular relevance to us is one branch called antitrust policy, which is designed to combat monopolies and cartels. Competition and antitrust policy seeks to balance efficiency and fairness. While efficiency is relatively easy to understand, it is often hard to agree on what is fair. In the U.S., fairness means equal opportunities for incumbents and new entrants. It is unfair for incumbents to fix prices and raise entry barriers to shut out new entrants. However, in Japan, fairness means the opposite. That is, incumbents that have invested in and nurtured an industry for a long time deserve to be protected from new entrants. What Americans approvingly describe as market dynamism is negatively labeled by Japanese as market turbulence. The Japanese ideal is orderly competition, which may be labeled collusion by Americans. Overall, the American antitrust policy is pro-competition and pro-consumer, while the Japanese approach is pro-incumbent and pro-producer. It is difficult to argue who is right or who's wrong here, but we need to be aware of such crucial differences. In general, because stronger pro-consumer antitrust laws, competitive forces have been stronger in the U.S. than in most other developed economies. As a result, on average, American consumers enjoy the lowest price, except for drugs, and Japanese consumers endure the highest price, except for cars. Competition and antitrust policy focuses on number one, collusive price setting, and number two, predatory pricing. Collusive price setting refers to price setting by monopolists or collusion parties at a level higher than the competition level. The global vitamin cartel convicted in the 2000s artificially jacked up prices by 30 to 40%. Another area of concern is predatory pricing, which is defined as first, setting prices below cost, and second, intending to raise prices after eliminating rivals to cover its losses in the long run, or an attempt to monopolize. This is an area of significant contention. First, it is not clear what exactly constitutes cost. Second, even when firms are found to be selling costs below the prices, U.S. courts have ruled out that if rivals are too numerous to eliminate, one firm cannot recoup the losses incurred by charging low prices by later jacking up the prices, so its pricing cannot be labeled predatory. This seems to be the most case in most of the industries. These two legal tests have made it extremely difficult to win a domestic predation case in the United States. Formal institutions governing international competition, a focus on anti-dumping. In the same spirit of predatory pricing, dumping is defined as first, an exporter selling below cost abroad, and second, planning to raise prices after eliminating local rivals. While domestic predation is usually labeled anti-competitive, cross-border dumping is often emotionally accused of being unfair. Consider the following two scenarios. First, a steel producer in Indiana enters a new market in Texas where it offers prices lower than those in Indiana, resulting in a 10% market share in Texas. Texas firms have two choices. The first one is to initiate a lawsuit against the Indiana firm for predatory pricing. However, it is difficult to prove that first, the Indiana firm is selling below cost, and second, that its pricing is an attempt to monopolize. Under U.S. antitrust laws, a predation case like this will have no chance of succeeding. In other words, domestic competition/antitrust laws offer no hope for protection. Thus, Texas firms are most likely to opt for their second option, which is to retaliate in kind by offering lower prices to customers in Indiana, benefiting consumers in both Texas and Indiana. Now, in the second scenario, the invading firm is not from Indiana but in India. Hold everything else constant, Texas firms can argue that the Indian firm is dumping. Under U.S. anti-dumping laws, Texas producers would almost certainly obtain legal relief on the very same facts that would not support an antitrust claim, let alone antitrust relief. Note that the imposing anti-dumping duties on Indian imports reduces the incentive for Texas firms to counteract by entering India, resulting in higher prices in both Texas and India, where consumers are hurt. These two hypothetical scenarios are highly realistic. An OECD study in Australia, Canada, the EU, and the US reports that 90% of the practices found to be unfairly dumping in these countries would never have been questioned under their own antitrust laws if used between domestic firms. In a nutshell, foreign firms are discriminated against by the formal rules of the game. Discrimination is also evident in the actual anti-dumping investigation. A case is usually filed by a domestic firm with the relevant government authorities. In the U.S., the authorities are the International Trade Administration, which is a unit of the Department of Commerce, and International Trade Commission, which is an independent government agency. These government agencies then send lengthy questionnaires to the foreign firms accused of dumping and request comprehensive proprietary data on their cost and pricing in English using U.S. Generally Accepted Accounting Principles or GAAP within 30 to 45 days. Many foreign defendants fail to provide such data on time because they are not familiar with U.S. GAAP. The investigation can have one of the four following outcomes. 1. If no data are forthcoming from abroad, the estimated data provided by the accusing firm become the evidence, and the accusing firm can easily win. Number 2. If foreign firms do provide data, the accusing firm can still argue that these unfair foreigners have lied. There is no way their costs can be so low. In the case of Louisiana versus Chinese crawfish suppliers, the authenticity of the $9 per week salary made by Chinese workers was a major point of contention. Third, if the lost cost data were to be verified, U.S. and EU anti-dumping laws allow the complainant to argue that these data are not fair. In the case of China, the argument goes its cost data reflect huge distortions due to government intervention because China is still a non-market economy. Wages may be low, but workers may also be provided with low-cost housing and government-subsidized benefits. Thus, the crawfish case boiled down to how much it would cost hypothetically to raise crawfish in a market economy. In this particular case, Spain was mysteriously chosen. Because Spanish costs were about the same as Louisiana cost, despite vehement objections, the Chinese were found guilty of dumping in America by selling below Spanish costs. Thus, 110 to 123% import duties were levied on Chinese crawfish. Last one. The fourth possible outcome is that the defendant wins the case. But this is rare and happens in only 5% of the anti-dumping cases in the U.S. One study found that simply filing an anti-dumping petition, regardless of the outcome, may result in a non-trivial 1% increase in the stock price for U.S. listed firms, which is an average of $46 million increase in market value. Evidently, Wall Street knows that Uncle Sam favors U.S. firms. Globally, this means that governments usually protect their domestic firms in anti-dumping investigations. Not surprisingly, anti-dumping cases have proliferated throughout the world. It is ironic that the rising tide of globalization in the last 2 decades has been accompanied by the rising proliferation of anti-dumping cases which are allowed by the WTO. The institution-based message to firms defending home markets is clear. Get to know your country's anti-dumping laws. The institution-based message to firms interested in doing businesses abroad is also clear. Your degree of freedom in overseas pricing is significantly less than that in domestic pricing. Let's drop the F word, free, in free market competition. Overall, institutional conditions such as the availability of anti-dumping protection are not just the background. They determine directly what weapons a firm has in its arsenal to wage competitive battles. Next, we outline resources and capabilities used in such battles.